So, who are you, and what are you going to show us? Where are we?
My name is Danny Thorpe, and I work in the Windows Live platform team. I've been working on some gadgets for client-side browsers, and we just released the Windows Live Contacts gadget, which allows you to access Windows Live contacts from Messenger, Hotmail, etc., in an arbitrary third-party website. So you don't have to have this deep relationship with as a Microsoft partner. You can actually just plop this thing into your website and allow your web viewers, your web users, to use their contacts with your website with just a little bit of JavaScript code.
And you're going to show us some cool demos?
I am going to show you some cool demos.
So where are we right now?
We're in your office, Ken.
Yeah, I was saying, this looks like...
I work out of California, but I'm up here in Redmond, and we said, hey, let's do the video.
And so tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get here working at Microsoft?
I started out at Borland. I was at Borland for 15 years, working in Pascal and Delphi, chief architect of the Delphi compiler there. And I did a stint at Google, doing some browser-related things there that I can't tell you about. And then here I am at Microsoft, working on more browser stuff.
And you've been here how long?
Several months, April. So
Working on Windows Live platform stuff? Not
actually working exclusively on this gadget that we just released. What was supposed to be a 4-week project turned out to be about 4 months.
But there's a lot of it that relates to the overall platform.
Yes.
Yeah.
This Contacts gadget is a stepping stone. It's like a first proof of concept and demo of some technologies that we've been thinking about and wanting to do. And so, in looking at the gadget, it is useful in itself, but don't think of this as like the next business venture for Microsoft, Contacts gadgets. What it is an entry point for architecture, building out a better web platform for web application development. In particular, trying to really attack some of the really nasty problems in web app development. Number one on my list is communication between elements on the web page. There's some very good browser security model stuff around that, where if you have your host page and you've got an iframe that sits in another domain, you don't want them sharing information willy-nilly. But sometimes you do want to share just specific kinds of information.
Like with the user in control of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
You want to have the user in control. You want the user to be confident in who's asking for it and who's getting it and what's going back and forth. No behind-the-scenes kind of stuff. That's also part of the reason I'm excited about client-side development, because it's not server 1 talking to server 2 and you're worried about what they're tracking about you and things like that. This all happens on the client.
And this contacts gadget is kind of a first entry point into opening up our contacts database,
Right.
which has maybe, over several hundred million unique people with over about 13 billion records.
Yeah, I
total.
believe it's 240 million active users in the last 30 days between Hotmail and Messenger, and something like 12 to 14 billion contact records.
Which has all your relationship information. And
Right, so
forth.
it's friends lists and associations and so forth. And again, we're making this available on a per user basis, so that a user goes from site to site, and if a site has this contact gadgets on it, then their user information, their contacts come with them for the user to use. And the website can say, here's a place where you can fill in an address. How would you like to use one of your contacts here? And the user can click on it and say, there, I want to use this.
So a key thing around this component is not necessarily hosting it on a Microsoft site. It's to allow third-party websites to host it and allow their users of their site, their visitors, to access contacts and then Windows Live contacts and integrate them in with that third-party application.
This is the first, I think one of the first pieces of our architecture that really shows a new focus on openness in terms of supporting any server, just about any browser. We're trying to get the fringe browsers as well, and submitting bug reports to various browser makers and so forth, saying your iframes aren't working quite right. But in particular, actually, we've gotten some confusion over the use of the name gadget.
Yeah.
So, is the contacts gadget really a gadget? Well, yes and no. Yes, it's a gadget in the sense that an iPod is a gadget or a phone is a gadget. But no, it is not a gadget in the definition of Windows Live gadget, which is a piece of code that only runs on Windows Live.
Live.com.
Sorry, live.com.
Yeah.
or spaces.com, spaces.live.com now.
Or a Windows Vista sidebar gadget.
Right.
Those are specific gadgets.
Right. So these domains all have a special environment that's set up, and the code that runs in those domains has extra privileges and things like that. So the gadgets live in those domains, and they can't just be taken out and put someplace else. That's great for saturation enrichment of that particular place, but it's not great for reach. The only place you can use it is live.com. For this contacts gadget, we wanted to have reach. And so we specifically built it so that it would run just as in any HTML. It's got JavaScript on it, so you need to have a JavaScript-enabled browser. But any browser, any web server, any platform, any user. That's the goal.
So how about we jump into a demo?
Okay.
Walk us through.
So we're looking at the dev.live.com. This is the developer-facing page for live.com. Live.com is a consumer-facing part of it. The developer page has these notes. We just did this new contacts gadget article. A couple of notes on the known issues that we're still working on. We go into the developer info, Windows Live contacts beta page. Shows a static image of the contacts gadget and some additional text. We've got a couple of sample apps here. We'll go to Map Your Contacts. And this is actually a mashup of Virtual Earth with the contacts gadget. It comes up over here, and as we'll see a little bit later, you, the web designer, the web author, specify a div section in your HTML, and you give it an ID. And when you call our API, you give us the name of that ID that you want us to use, and we'll set up shop inside of it. So this gadget is saying that we're not logged in, so I'll click on the login. And this brings up a Live ID login page. We specifically are bringing it up in a separate pop-up window, browser window, to give the user some indication of what they're looking at, login.live.com, and to make use of the branding and so forth. If you were to embed this in a page, you have a security issue because it's very easy for hostile script, evil.com, to spoof your appearance and give you a fake login. It's much more difficult to do it with a pop-up window like this, so that's why we're doing it.
And then users know that they're giving their password to the Microsoft Windows Live domain.
We have a much greater assurance.
Mm-hmm.
So I clicked on a login that I already have a password set up for. And yeah, that is clicking. Microsoft IE clicks a lot every time we do a navigation, and this gadget uses a technique which does a lot of navigation.
So this little area here we're looking at, where this black bordered area, this is an iframe hosting on the page,
right?
And that there's some way that this hosting area here, the main domain, can't access the data that's here at this moment.
Correct. So the main page is, technically all of this is living on dev.live.com, so it's not really domain hopping, but the main page here with the Virtual Earth map in the background contains a div section. Inside the div section, we have set up an iframe. And inside the iframe, we have a URL that goes to dev.live.com. So we can access things inside of that iframe that are a little bit more sensitive, things like the address book itself. And then after the user, if we display that in our UI in the iframe, the user can pick out which items, which individual contacts they want to share with the host page. And then we will transfer that information over the firewall into the host page.
So this isn't a browser feature like an Internet Explorer. This is a technique, right?
This is a technique that Scott Isaacs has been talking with us about for a while and has been thinking about for quite a while, so I give full credit to Scott Isaacs for coming up with it. But it's a technique that uses plain old DHTML. It doesn't use any exploits or security holes or anything like that. And it's I can't go into details right now, but
didn't Scott has blogged about some things about this?
I think he's blogged about
like some generic way,
yeah, generic.
not specific to this.
The execs are still a little bit sensitive about talking about the specific mechanics of how we do it. Of course, the code is just sitting out there, so you can look at the code. But anyway, the point is that inside this iframe is sitting on our domain, and outside that iframe it's sitting on your domain. And when the user clicks on the send button, it sends the information from our domain to your domain without going back up to the server.
We should state that, I guess one reason we're having to do this now is we don't have a complete way using Live ID and so forth for any client or web page to access our contacts directly. This is a way of the contacts gadget Microsoft created, integrated with Live ID, has that ability.
Right.
And then using this technique on the page, it allows a sharing model.
Yeah. And even with the Live ID combined with the SOAP APIs that we're using to access this data on the Microsoft server, even with that combination, that requires a high degree of partnership because there's a lot of trust required in doing that relationship, that access. So to do all those things, you would need to be have a pretty close business relationship with Microsoft. With this contacts gadget, because we're only giving out very small information that the user has indicated is okay, there's not as much concern about an arbitrary third-party host raping our contacts information.
So what you're letting the user do is pick which pieces of data out of their own contacts hosted at Windows Live that they would like to share.
Right. And again, the third-party website does not need to have any special relationship with Microsoft. There's probably a click-through terms of use kind of thing, but there's no strong business partnership required with this.
So what's the scenario here? Like now we've got our contacts. The hosting
so
page can't see them at the moment.
Right. We've signed in. We've got this box here, which is looking at the contacts, and the host page still doesn't know anything. The user can select a couple of names and say, send these to the host page. We click on the send button, and it brings up a lovely dialog that is brought to us by the Microsoft Legalese team, and basically saying, this is the information you're about to send. You're going to send it to somebody that's not Microsoft. So, are you sure?
I noticed that there's a piece here that says it lists what fields the hosting page is asking for. Where did those come from? Is that the hosting page?
That is part of the request. When you say, please set up shop in this div section, by the way, this is the information I would like to have.
I see.
Those are the fields that we show, and those are the only fields that get transferred across. So if you're interested in email addresses, the user will see that you're sending email addresses across.
And then the page shows the non-blank data that would be shared.
Correct.
Exactly.
If you have a website where the user can understand your need for an email address, but they see that you're also asking for postal addresses, the end user is probably going to say, wait a minute, that's a little weird. Why are you asking that? You didn't say that you were going to get that. So, that's why we show
it's nice to see the data. Yeah. And
then we say, are you sure you want to send this information over? Also, when you're doing this for your own website, we require that you provide a privacy statement, which is what this URL is up here. And this is your privacy statement.
So here's one for dev.live, even though it's ours. So when you have this send button, you're really not posting it out to HTTP, even though it says send. You're really just sharing it with the other hidden iframe.
Nothing goes across the wire. This is all client-side, from one element on the HTML to another element on the HTML. And that's something that I'd like to develop further in the future is enabling DHTML and JavaScript and so forth, the browser environment, to support more autonomous components. But to do that, you really need to have communication between the components. So we'll click the send button, and where do those people go?
Maybe you picked some people that didn't have address.
Yeah, I think I did. So let's, Peter Bangkok, I think. Do that one again. Send. There they are.
And how did they get mapped? I assume I have an address. How do you get them on the map?
Right. So what the code on this page is doing is it's receiving the postal addresses from these contacts, and then it's calling an API in Virtual Earth to translate those into geocodes. And so Virtual Earth has an API that'll do best guess for like city-state.
So two things. There's an event on this hosting page that gets them saying, hey, there's some data that's now being shared, and you can go get a JavaScript array?
Right. So the contacts gadget, another thing that you provide when you set it up, is a callback. And that callback will be called whenever the user logs in, logs out, or when there's data available.
Is the Virtual Earth geolocation lookup being done from the client, or are you sending something to the server and then it's getting called from a proxy?
No, the request is made on the client. The script is all running on the client. Now there is a server ping that goes up to actually look it up.
I see.
That's behind the API.
Yeah.
So there is a round trip.
In case someone wanted to build a mashup like this using virtual Earth. Yeah.
So we got two little.
So you hover, maybe zoom in on one of these using.
So you hold down the Alt key on the keyboard and lasso one of the guys, and it kind of zooms in a little bit.
That's a cool tip with virtual Earth. Yeah. Windows Live Local.
So we can hover here.
Aha.
And it has these. Now then, these are coded by this particular web app.
So hover over chat. Just stay there. Now I can go down here, and you can see it's creating a link that says MSNIM:chat, and that's a feature when you have like MSN Messenger, Windows Live Messenger loaded. It'll allow you to link out.
Can you guess if this is the stuff that Ken wrote?
I didn't write it, but I worked on it.
Okay, so we'll click on that, and now it's saying you're about to start a conversation. Are you sure? Yada yada yada. And it actually pops up Messenger. I'm already logged into Messenger. It pops up Messenger and establishes a connection to that particular contact person. Now this is a fake address, so obviously it's not going to do anything. But basically you go straight from your web app directly into a chat in Messenger. And as you saw in that balloon, there's also capabilities for doing voice calls, video connections, other types of media connections.
In Windows Live Messenger.
In Windows Live Messenger.
And there's no presence right now.
No, there's no presence.
Presence as in like online, offline, busy.
That's another piece that we're working on, both in terms of in general traffic for the pop-ups, but also in the contacts gadget itself. There's a whole bunch of things that we want to add to this. Presence information, just to say whether or not a person's online or not. The little photo tiles, the little images for the folks that like to put those up there.
Display picture.
Display picture. And the irony is that even though these are all stored on Microsoft servers, each one is pretty much on its own domain. So we have cross-domain issues even in internal apps from Microsoft. So I've got to go, probably next is on my list is to go figure out how to get those tiles, the image tiles, and show those in the gadget and the presence.
There's some other buttons here, like there's this edit and delete, so you can actually manage your like if you select one and hit edit, what happens?
So if we go select Peter Benkoff and say edit, we can actually edit all of the contact information that's stored on the Windows Live Contacts database for that person. So you can go in and put pager numbers and other phone numbers and things like that, and post it back to the server. So this is not just a read-only.
Now, the way the contacts work is that if the person here had originally put in their address to share with people, then you'd see it.
Yes.
And if they don't have one, then you can update it, but you're only updating your local copy of them, not the original or anyone else who has them in their buddy list.
Right. And now we're getting off into the feature sets of the contact database, and I'm just a consumer.
Yeah.
So.
But just be clear, because when I do this demo, I get asked that same question: are you actually updating their content? No, you're just updating your. It's like an Outlook. You're just updating your Outlook contact kind of thing.
It's like a copy on write. That if they provided the data to you, then it stays up to date. If they didn't provide anything, you can fill in.
Right. Now, and then there's an add new button, so you can actually add a brand new contact right here. Just map it right there.
It pops up right
you
here.
Just fill in name, address, email, and then boom, you could select them and map it right on this page.
Right. And then those will show up in your Hotmail and your Messenger accounts. There's a little bit of caching going on, so it may take about a couple of minutes for that to propagate.
Right.
So, I mean, this is just a real quick sample of an application that was put together using the contacts gadget to say, show me where people are on a map.
So some people ask, okay, this whole mapping thing, why would I care? I already know where my friend lives or something like that.
That's a little bit short-sighted criticism because obviously you've got postal addresses. You know where the people are. Okay, let's look out a little bit beyond today and say, how many people have GPS capability or will in the near future between cell phones and IP addresses and these other types of things. Contacts become really interesting when A, location information is available, and B, permission for being able to use that location information. I don't want to have my location broadcast to everybody.
As well as a user being able to set or turn off the publication of their location,
like
they say.
It's a combination of the owner of that information saying it's okay for these people to have access to it, and for those people to say, I want to subscribe to that person's information.
Right.
So, a usability scenario I'd like to go after when we get the location stuff going is I don't need to know the day-to-day location of my friend in Boston.
Right.
But if he happened to show up in California, It'd be cool if I could get a little bling that says, "Hey, Eli just came into town. You want to have lunch?"
And we did show at the Mix conference on a Pocket PC Windows mobile device, Virtual Earth Mobile, talking up and updating latitude, longitude, and then somebody walking outside bird's eye view in front of the Venetian, and so you're actually seeing where they are.
Yeah, that was Mix 06, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was using this. This is kind of an evolution of that, but we haven't hooked in the auto update piece.
Yeah, we're still working on getting that.
But it's all doable. It's part of the scenario. This is mostly an example to show what you could do, how you could build on it, and maybe just for developers to look at it and get the source code and get ideas.
And, this is a working example of how we're attacking some of the technology difficulties, and we are doing the cross-domain data transfer now, and so now what can you do with that as an application developer?
I would assume, even though that there might be new features added to this contact map example, the goal is to get non-Microsoft sites and third parties to take and add this contacts gadget to their page and come up with their own.
Yeah. The large purpose behind having the contacts gadget at all is to enable website developers to tap into this enormous resource of information and to make it more convenient for end users. I mean, that's ultimately what everything's about. It doesn't matter how cool the technology is. It's whether it makes a difference to the end users. How many times do you go to various websites and you have to log in, a unique login, have to have a different password, hopefully a different password. You have redundant information running all over the place. This is showing a technique for consolidation of, having the user consolidate information in a few places and being able to use it in a lot of places.
Mm-hmm. And other ideas for future stuff besides presence, like we thought about like live clipboard XML, where you could maybe copy onto the Windows clipboard.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in instead of having send to the website, having something in the contacts gadget so it says paste this to live clipboard, and that way it's an XML data format that's discoverable. Any other apps that are running on your PC or on your device
you just say,
would say, "Hey, you've got contact information out there. Thank you." And grab that.
Yeah,
and vice versa. That if you have contact information out on your clipboard, then the contacts gadget should be able to recognize that and say, add this to my Windows Live contacts.
And live clipboard is a way to put XML onto the Windows clipboard and let the user move it around. It doesn't matter what web pages they're on or what happened. They become the security model themselves. They're copying and pasting and whatever. And there is a new Channel 9 video on live clipboard, and there'll be some info on dev.live about it, so if people are curious.
And now the rest of the story.
Yeah. There's more.
So that was the contact map. Another one of our little app samples is called Start a Party, or Party Starter. Just want to bring it up real quick. Now, you saw on the first demo, we had to go through a login sequence. And on this one, it comes straight in and doesn't require that we log in. We're on a different application. Technically, it's the same domain, but this could be on a different domain as well, and the same behavior would be there because the user is logged into live.com, and that iframe is on live.com. So it doesn't really matter who the host page is. The user's experience moving from site to site is that their contacts go.
So in the future, hopefully there's a few websites out there that are hosting the gadget, and if you actually navigated, you signed into one, and then without closing the browser, you just navigated to another page with it, you would auto sign in.
And if that other site had contacts gadget or other Windows Live aware type controls, then that user's presence and experience would move with them as they go from site to site. So it'd be cool to see some bookseller type
retail
stores, online retail stores, event organizing sites. We can't mention any brand names here.
This is like a picker, right? Or it saves you copying and pasting address, city, state, zip.
So instead of having to type in your grandmother's postal address into the florist's email, the florist website, and into the bookseller's website, and to this other website, and then if grandma's moving around, she have to keep updating all those. Wouldn't it be a lot easier if, when you go to the bookseller, you say, "I want to use grandma's. I want to send this to grandma." Click on her contact, and it happens. It's not because the bookseller is subscribing to that information; it's not monitoring it or keeping it, but because you pushed it to them.
Right.
For a one-time use.
Instead of going into whatever Outlook or your online contacts, copying and pasting. You're just doing it through an easy mechanism.
Right. And that actually has some advantages for the website implementers themselves, because if you're particularly a smaller website, you have to invest quite a bit to get that storage of addresses and things like that. And there's a significant hazard in having that personal information on your server. Suddenly you're in the realm of having government regulations, audits, disclosures, all of these things because you're storing personal information for some period of time. If you were instead to say, we'll use something like the Live Contacts gadget to access address storage and so forth, then we don't have to store it locally.
What you're saying is use Windows Live Contacts as like your main online storage of contacts, and this combined with other things we're working on, like possible integration with Outlook, like that kind of thing, synchronization and replication.
And I don't see that this would be something that a huge online bookseller would jump into, because they can afford to do it themselves. But for a smaller operation, a smaller web developer, personal web developer sites and things like that, who don't even have the web resources to do any of this stuff, that would be very useful.
But if it was a very big retail online store, but you could be a first-time buyer there, and it would be nice to say, oh, I click on my Windows Live Contacts, pick the list. You have a better experience on their site because, hey, this is where I keep my contacts, and I just want to put in the shipping information. And if that's good for them too, because the user has a good experience, because they're not necessarily trying to create a database of who you're shipping to every day. All right, so what's next?
Okay, so what is next? Okay, so let's dig into some code. Are we going to go to the test demo first next? I can't remember. So let's go. I'm going to show you how to set up the contacts gadget. So we're going to be following the directions mostly that are on Dev Live. Well, let's do the API reference. There we go.
API reference.
API reference. So the contacts gadget API reference is really sophisticated. It's got one function.
Now this is client-side API. You don't have to know WSDL, SOAP, your API is a JavaScript library on the client.
You don't have to do SOAP and all that other stuff because we did it for you. It's like the scrubbing bubbles and things. And this is another point where the Windows Live gadgets that live on live.com are different from this contacts gadget, because the Windows Live gadgets that live on live.com are consumer-oriented. They're plug and play. You drop them on the page, they're done. There's no wiring, or the wiring's implicit. With the contacts gadget, there is some assembly required. You do need to wire it up. You need to integrate it into your website. You need to do something with the data that comes back. So this is not a consumer intended thing. This is for developers.
The three things are: you drop in the code that gets the gadget on the page, the code that wires up the event and tells it what fields you would want to share, and then the event handler that gets the JavaScript.
That's what we'll do next.
All right.
Okay, so the API reference, it all boils down to this call to Microsoft Gadget Contact Selector Partner. This is a beta. These names will be changing because I hate that name. And then these parameters. The function has a host element parameter, privacy statement URL, a data desired filter, callback function, and an endpoint URL. So the docs here go into pretty much detail on that. The host element is the name, the ID of the div section that you want us to set up shop in. The privacy statement is the URL to your website's privacy statement about what you're going to use this end user data for. And don't brush that off, because in the US and in particular in the European Union, they're very particular about needing those privacy disclosures. If you get it wrong, you could be penalized. So pay attention. Data desired. When you request data, when you, the website, request data from the contacts gadget, you tell it what you want. You can't have, well, you can ask for everything, and it's up to the end user.
And you can go to the Windows Live Contacts, when you say add new, you can see all the fields that are there, right? Like name, address, phone, and you could say, hey, what are those?
Yeah. So, they're enumerated here.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
It's up to some degree, and I think there's a couple of extra ones. And there's some of these are sort of meta names, meta tags, like name. Because there's so many different things that name could come from in the actual contact data, this is give me something. It'll give you first name, last name, if there is one. It'll give you nickname, if there is one. There's a certain priority to these things. The email address, primary email, personal email, business email, and it'll go down the list in a particular order until it finds one, and then they'll return that.
What do you think about, and I just came up with this, what do you think about having a little wrapper where it's like a little genre of fields, so that in the library itself, you could have like basic contact or contact list 1,
Oh,
2,
sure.
and then you could put those in that list, but that way on a client you don't have to list them all. You
Right.
just say, give me the basic.
Yeah, so like a couple of string constants, essentially,
Yeah.
because this is a string.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that would work. We could do that. So like a predefined string that is postal address, and that puts the fields in.
Yeah, it's like mailing address.
Yeah.
You don't need, and the phone number. That's the basic thing to mail.
The results callback is what the gadget will call to give you the data when that comes back.
It's like a function, right?
It's function call. And it gives you 3 things. It gives you status information about when the user is logged in and when they're logged out, because this turns out to be valuable for your website to prompt your visitor to go log in. That's why you can't do anything further with the data. And it actually gives you the data. And then this channel endpoint URL. From the demos that are out on the web and so forth, this is the thing that you have to modify in the parameters, because this is an HTML page that you, it's called channel.htm, that you need to copy from our stuff into your site. It's a single little page. It's got a little bit of JavaScript on it. And what that does is it gives us a destination to send the data to inside your domain. Without this file, or if this file is pointed in the wrong direction, you won't receive any data.
Okay.
So this transmission of data between domains requires that both ends cooperate.
So I'm assuming that even though the docs, the API is fairly simple, for a developer, looking at a sample that works is probably the easiest way to learn it and get started.
Of course. Especially a sample that's had all the comments removed. So that's the API. Let's go to simulate a real development environment, we've got an internet server already set up on this machine, so we have a local host. I'm going to open it with Visual Studio, and this is an HTML page. And the first thing you see here is there's a JavaScript include of this dev.live.com scripts address manager contact selector partner.js. That's to pull in the contact gadgets library, and that file name will be changing. I can guarantee it. For this particular beta, you also need to include an additional script file, which is not in the documentation, sorry about that, called proxy.js. This is partly an artifact of one of the pains of doing JavaScript development, that JavaScript cannot refer to JavaScript. HTML is the thing, is what drives the show, and it's a real pain for real development. It interferes with your ability to develop modular code and have code in source files that are related to a particular function. And there's some really nasty, dirty hacks in DHTML that you can simulate in inclusion, and that's one of the things we're working on there. So there's some text, blah, 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 blah. Right here, we have a div section, which has nothing in it, and that's actually fairly important that it doesn't have anything in it.
It's a container.
It's a container, and it has an ID. And whatever you name it, you need to remember, because that's what you're going to tell us it is. Then I also have a div section here, which my callback function is going to dump information into. It's going to put the names and addresses here. This is the results. And some text, blah, 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 blah. Here we are. So we're in a JavaScript statement inside of the HTML. And we say document, get element by ID, enter HTML. Okay, we're initializing the context selector. This is a good debugging aid to find out if your script is even running at all. The next thing we do is we construct the contact selector partner, and we grab that div section called live contact gadget element, and we give that element to the constructor as a parameter. We pass in the privacy URL, which in this sample is bogus. Don't ship your code this way. We pass in the data that we would like to have, such as name, email, personal street, location. These are all...
and that's where you could potentially say, basic contact or some kind of a string, and then there'd be this little...
There'd be some predefined values.
Yeah. So,
Receive data is a callback function defined up here. There's receive data. We'll get to that in a second. And then this last piece, channel.htm. If you take one of the samples that's out on dev.live.com, you'll see an initialization section like this, and you'll see that it says http dev.live.com blah 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 channel.htm. And if you take that code and you paste it into your localhost HTML file, it won't work. You need to modify that URL because the data is going to be sent back to, theoretically, dev.live.com, which isn't you. So for it to work, it needs to go to your localhost. So you come in here and you modify it to change the domain name to localhost and where you put the file. Put it in the live subdirectory. Okay, so that's for wiring it up. When the user clicks send, share this information with the website, receive data will be called, and it has three states: sign in, that the user has just signed in, or is signed in; sign out, that the user needs to sign in; and then data. The data is provided in an array, a JavaScript array, and each element in the array is a JavaScript object which has attributes. The name of the attributes are the field names that you asked for. So if you ask for name, email, personal address, the properties on the JavaScript object will be name, email, personal address.
With the data they provided.
Those values. The values of those things will be the data.
If there was any.
Right.
Could be blank.
It could be blank. And then you have 3 or 4 different ways for JavaScript to represent.
And then, of course, after this event method, then you would do something like map it on virtual map, or fill it into some text boxes.
Yeah, this sample just constructs a little bit of HTML and dumps it into that div section.
So where do people see this sample?
So you people cannot see this sample because it's on my machine. But we can go over to the browser. Nice segue. So go HTTP. Whoops. Localhost. I challenge all of you people watching to go do this on your machine and see that it doesn't work. Oops.
Probably something you were modifying.
Yeah, I modified something.
Made too many changes. Is this a sample online?
It will be. And I made a modification, and I didn't see it.
Something that we'll put on dev.live.com as a little test page?
Or from my
blog.
Blog.
Yeah, okay. What is your blog?
blogs.mscn.com/dthorpe. Okay.
And it's Thorpe with an E?
With an E. Okay, C9
So you're demoing debugging too here, that's cool.
Oh yeah, totally unscripted.
No, it is scripted, but it's debugged scripted.
Okay, so this is showing us our sign-in prompt. So we will go sign in.
Yep.
Go back to this guy.
It's kind of cool that a developer can just build on this using a localhost page.
Mm-hmm. It's been a real godsend for development and debugging because it's really not a good idea to have debug statements in your production servers.
Now, does it have to go through localhost, or can it be a standalone HTML file you just open up directly, like C drive, whatever?
If you open it up on C drive directly inside of the browser, your security permissions are going to be different. Be very careful of that.
So you can get it to work, but it's not good development testing.
The sandbox for an HTML that's loaded as a file is much more restrictive than an HTML file that's loaded through a domain. Localhost counts as a domain. Okay, so we're logged in.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll grab a couple of these fictitious names. We'll say send contacts. Here they are. Yeah, that looks good. This is where I want to have those pictures. So see the little photo tiles that we've sketched in there?
Display profile, yeah.
We had that in the original design spec, and then we found out how much trouble it is to find those things.
Right, because they're not stored in the same exact database.
And here they are. So this is that that little status thing. Done. It received 2
Yeah.
records. Blah 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 blah.
And the idea is you could write code to go do whatever you want. This is
Right.
a test page to show you how to
Right. This is the test page.
integrate it and collect the
So,
data.
there in the space of about 5 or 10 minutes, you put together an app that can tap into 240 million users that come to your website. Of course, you have to bring them to your website first. And all of their contact.
You really just need to know the HTML and JavaScript. You don't have to know web services, API type thing. Or
They do the soap pane for you.
Is
Now,
there a...
one more thing I want to show real quick?
Yeah, I was going to ask about
Um,
Firefox.
Again, that we're making a lot of effort to support a broad spectrum of browsers, so we can do C9 demo. Now listen carefully.
No clicks?
No clicks.
That's due to some bug you're working on?
Well, it's due to a feature in Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer clicks every time it navigates, and this particular technique, the implementation, uses a lot of navigation. Netscape doesn't click on navigate, so...
Firefox.
Firefox doesn't click on navigate. Neither does Netscape, probably. And sure, whatever.
So is there anything that doesn't work with the Firefox browser? It's pretty much you'd expect if you want to develop with it or use it?
We spend most of our time working on issues to work on the various versions of IE, because there are a lot of variations in those versions. Firefox is remarkably stable.
Okay.
It's really fun to work with. So here's some folks on my contacts list, etc. And that's working on Firefox.
Cool.
What else were we going to do?
The key is that the developer can develop with the gadget using the Firefox browser, or
Yeah.
they can assume that a user could come to that page with the Firefox browser, and the
Yeah.
context gadget will work fine. Doesn't matter what
So
platform.
For the gadget, for the thing that we'd like people to take a look at is what sort of web applications would you build if your web app could tap into these address book type things. The other thing to think about longer term is, and where we're thinking about, is how to use these kinds of capabilities to build richer controls that have a very broad reach across the browser spectrum.
So the date of this recording is August 24th, 2006. Do we expect to have some little updates on a regular basis, or do you expect it to be, a little bit of time and then a fair amount of things come up all at once?
We're not the kind of product that needs 3 to 4 years per release. So we're looking to have probably bi-weekly, twice a month, bug fix type things for the beta. The API should be fairly stable until we go to the 1.0 release, in which all of the URLs will change. And we hope to have several more gadgets out by this time next year.
And I assume as we find sites that start using it, whether it's on their blog or on their business page or just a test page or a mashup,
Let us know.
that we can link to it.
Yeah, let us know what you're doing. It's easier if you tell us than if we have to go find it the hard way, but we will
Right.
find it.
And your blog or my blog, people can get contact and then send us a note or so forth.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else?
Stay tuned. More
Okay.
stuff coming.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.